In this video, I'm going to show you how I turned this Raspberry Pi into a Stream Deck alternative. Let's get into it. The Stream Deck is a customizable control pad used to trigger different events or execute different processes. For example, I can use a Stream Deck to turn on and off this light over here. I can use it to mute and unmute myself on Zoom. It's a very useful tool that a lot of streamers use on their streams to execute different things. My name is Patrick, and this is Everyday Tech for everyday people. And today I'm going to tell you how we're going to turn this Raspberry Pi into a Stream Deck alternative. Now, the tools that we're going to be using is this Raspberry Pi 4, which I'm happy to say they're becoming slowly more available. Then I have this cheap LCD screen here. This is a 3.5-inch touch LCD screen. So we're going to be using this touch screen to interface with the software on the Raspberry Pi. And then we're going to be using the companion software. Now I have a number of videos on the companion software, but it's basically a piece of software to do all the things that a Stream Deck can. And it has a number of things that the Stream Deck can't do as well. So it's all about the software and the number of connections that you can do with it. So I'm going to take you step by step on what we need to install and how we can configure our Raspberry Pi. So the first thing we're going to do is download the companion Pi image. This is basically a Debian or Raspbian with the companion software preloaded. So we finished downloading the companion Pi image for Raspberry Pi. So let's go ahead and install that onto our micro SD card. I already have that inserted into my computer. So we're going to go to Choose OS, Use Custom, and let's go ahead and choose the file that we downloaded. You don't need to unzip it. It's in a zip format here. Go ahead and choose the storage. Before we hit Write, we want to make sure we configure our Raspberry Pi. And I've gone through this entire step in a previous video, but basically we want to set our host name, set the Wi-Fi because we do need to be on the network, and make sure you enable SSH from this configuration screen because we do need to SSH into our Raspberry Pi. So we finished writing to the micro SD card. I put it in my Raspberry Pi, booted up, and now it's fully booted up. And you can still see that the LCD screen here is just white when I boot it up, but we'll get to that soon. I need to install the drivers for the LCD screen. But before we do that, let's start to set up Companion a little bit with a few buttons that we'll use for the rest of the demo. So I'm in my web browser here on my computer, and I've logged into Companion that's on the Raspberry Pi. I call this Companion Pi as the host name, so I can go to companionpi.local:8000, or you can use the IP address :8000. That means it's on port 8000. But we're going to go ahead and just set up some buttons here. I do have an overview and setup video for Companion, so check that out in the description below. But we're going to go ahead and just do a few buttons. I'm mainly going to do set up a few buttons to control my ATEM Mini, which I've done a video on that before as well. So let's go ahead and go through this whole process here. So of course we need to add our connections. I'm going to go here, type in the ATEM Blackmagic. Here we go. And then we need to configure this. And so my particular configuration does have this IP address. Oh, it already detected it. Go ahead and say save. And now let's go configure our buttons here. And I'm mainly going to use these first 6 buttons here. Or actually, I'm going to use these first 8 buttons right here. And that'll be our final output. But we'll see that in a minute. I'm going to go ahead and fill out some buttons here. So I've set up some basic buttons in our Companion setup here. And basically I have it switching between the 4 different inputs on my ATEM Mini. Now this is going through the network right now. Now if I can show you this in action, let's go ahead and go to the web buttons here. And let me show you my camera. This right now is on camera 1, but if I switch to camera 3, you're going to see here my GoPro is set up here. Let's go switch back to cam 1. I don't have anything set up on cam 2. So now we have a basic interface, basic setup in Companion to control my ATEM Mini. So now let's work on the interface of actually triggering the Companion on the Raspberry Pi itself. So right now we're logged into our companion Pi here, and now we need to install the drivers for our LCD screen here. And most of these cheaper generic LCD screens can use the LCD show drivers. And the way we do that is, let's go ahead and say git clone, and I'll put all these commands in the description below. Then we're going to go ahead and run the command for the LCD screen here. I have the 3.5-inch LCD screen, so we're going to go sudo and do the LCD35 show. And this will take a little while to install the drivers, but it's also going to reboot the Raspberry Pi. And after this is done, I'll show you the final results. Okay, so our Raspberry Pi has rebooted, and now we can see that the LCD screen is working. Now, something obvious here is that it booted up into the terminal or the CLI command here. It's basically the light version of Raspberry Pi. So basically, the companion Pi image doesn't have a desktop environment. So why do we need a desktop environment and not this command line interface? Well, in order for us to use the companion Pi on the Raspberry Pi, we need to have a Chromium browser or some kind of web browser. In order to have a web browser, we need a desktop environment. So now I'm going to just install some desktop environment on here from the command line. So I'm logged back into my Raspberry Pi, and I'm going to install the desktop environment. And I'm going to install the LXDE desktop environment. It's a common one for Linux and Raspberry Pi. So I'm just going to go ahead and copy and paste this command here. There's a number of desktop environments that you can install, but this will take a little bit of time to install. Okay, so we've installed our desktop environment. That took about 5 minutes, depending on the model of Raspberry Pi you have and your internet connection. That may take longer or shorter, but we need to now configure our Raspberry Pi to log into the desktop environment automatically. So if you're familiar with Raspberry Pis, you need to go into sudo raspi config. Oops, type it in correctly. And we're going to go into system options, boot auto login, and we're going to pick the automatically logged in as Pi user, because this is going to be used as our companion interface. Now, if you have any sensitive information on your Raspberry Pi, then definitely do not do that. And this may not be the right solution for you. We're going to go ahead and finish, and this is going to go and reboot into our desktop environment. So I've rebooted the Raspberry Pi, and I logged in right into the desktop environment. It actually did it very quickly, and actually the touchscreen works right out of the box. That's part of the LCD drivers that we installed earlier. Now our next step is to install the Chromium browser and then configure the Raspberry Pi to log into the companion web interface buttons right away on login or on reboot. And so this will be an awesome setup, and this will complete kind of our Stream Deck replacement here. So let's do that now. Install the Chromium browser, configure it to boot up into the companion buttons. To install the Chromium browser, it's very simple. We just put the following command in, and then after this is completed, we'll configure the auto login. Before we tell the Raspberry Pi and the Chromium browser what URL to go to, we need to know what URL we should tell it to go to. So let's go back to companion on our desktop here. Let's go to web buttons here, and we want to go to configure these web buttons here. I'm going to hide the full screen button since we're going to already log into the full screen. We're going to go and reduce this to 4 columns and 2 rows. And basically I'm doing 4 columns and 2 rows is because this is what will really fit on our little 3.5-inch screen. Now, if you have a bigger screen, then this is going to change, of course, and you can change it accordingly. But I think that's all we'll need. 2 rows, 4 columns, and we're hiding the full screen mode since we're going to already log into full screen mode. Now, as you can see, the URL did change here. So we're going to go ahead and copy this URL, and we're going to paste it into our configuration file. So we're going to tell the Raspberry Pi to open up the Chromium browser and open up the web interface buttons. So since I'm using the LXDE desktop environment, we can find that auto login configuration file in our home directory. We're going to go cd.config lx sessions lxde. In that directory, you have an autostart file. We're going to go and open up that file. Let's use nano autostart. And this will open up this particular file. And we're going to go ahead and type in our Chromium browser. We're going to say kiosk, which will open it up in full screen mode. We're going to copy and paste the URL. Now I'm going to do something different here. I'm going to change this from companion pi to localhost. And this will tell it to use the localhost file or just the local machine that it's already on. And we have this ready. And to save this, I'm going to do Control X, hit Y to save, enter. And now to reboot the Raspberry Pi, sudo reboot. And this should open up the Chromium browser and open up our web buttons after that. So I've restarted our Raspberry Pi here, and this will open up the Chromium browser. And we're going to see a slight error in the beginning because I think the Chromium browser will open even before the companion software has time to fully load. So you'll see what I mean, but it'll automatically fix itself after the companion software is fully loaded. You see, initially it said site can't be reached, but now we have our buttons here fully loaded. And to show that it's working, let me see if I can press this. We're going to hit cam 3 again. And now we switch to cam 3. I'm going to go ahead and switch back to cam 1. And now we have our companion setup fully working. And then if we wanted to configure more buttons, we're back to our desktop and we're back to the companion software interface. We go to buttons. Let me go ahead and add this button here. I already had it selected. And we don't need to even reboot our Raspberry Pi because it automatically shows up there. It showed up automatically. And if, let's see, let's show it in action. Puts to black bars. And we have our camera 1 back to camera 1. Now, other things that we can do to configure the Raspberry Pi is you can see the mouse cursor there. We can have that automatically disappear after we touch it. And you can also automatically disable the screensaver if you don't want the screensaver to show up at all. So one of the main questions is, why do this? And is there an advantage over having a Stream Deck? Well, first on the why. First, personally, this was a very good experiment for me to figure out some use for this LCD screen. I've had this LCD screen for a while, but couldn't find any good practical use. I felt this is a good practical use for it. Then the other reason is cost. The cost of the Stream Deck Mini I have here with 6 buttons is retails for about $80. You can find one of these cheap LCD screens for about $10 to $12. And if you go somewhere to like a 7-inch screen, actually, where you could fit more buttons, and it's of course a larger screen, you know, it can retail around $40, which is still a lot cheaper than a Stream Deck. Now, the other advantage of having Companion on the Raspberry Pi, and let's say not something that's installed on your computer, is it takes the resources of running Companion off your main computer and onto something like a Raspberry Pi. Another advantage is works like a server. So meaning you can have a number of people interfacing with it to control the Companion, and the Companion controls all the other devices. So there's a lot of different advantages of having it. There are definitely some cons of having this kind of setup. First, you have to do the whole setup from scratch. All the different things can be time consuming and can be a little bit confusing to some people. Then you have to install the drivers for the LCD screen. But the main disadvantage or main con for me in this setup is the screen itself. This is not the brightest screen. I don't know how to configure the brightness on the screen. I think it requires some software. And then these are not tactile buttons at all. This is just a touchscreen, which may not be the most accurate touchscreen as well. I can do some calibrations, but still nothing beats the physical buttons of the Stream Deck here. Even with only having 6 buttons here, the buttons and the tactile feel of real buttons, nothing really beats that at all. Now, there are ways around this problem or to mitigate this issue of having a small LCD screen that's not as bright and that's not that accurate. One of the obvious ways is just to get a better screen. So you can buy 7-inch, even 10-inch touchscreens for the Raspberry Pi. It's like having a giant Stream Deck, even bigger than the Stream Deck XL, which does retail for $250, which is really expensive. You can buy these bigger LCD screens at a pretty good price. Now, if you do have a Stream Deck and you want to use a companion software and you want to use it on the Raspberry Pi, you can plug in the Stream Deck directly into the Raspberry Pi, and the buttons will show up on your Stream Deck automatically, which is a really nice thing about the companion software. But the other way, of course, is wirelessly. This is acting like a server, so you can access it remotely like we've been doing it on my desktop. So one of the best LCD screens, or the best screens in general with a very accurate touchscreen, is of course my iPad. I have an iPad Pro, but any type of iPad will be better than any kind of touchscreen that you can buy for the Raspberry Pi. And that way you can control it, configure it wirelessly, as long as they're on the same network. So what do you think? Is this something practical that you can use in your environment? I will say people who are using the companion software on a Raspberry Pi, they usually have a Stream Deck attached to it, or they're interfacing it with it using an iPad. They just really need something from the companion software that the Stream Deck software can't give them. But for me, I wanted to see how I can utilize this LCD screen that I had. What other ways are you using an LCD screen if you have one for your Raspberry Pi? If you enjoyed this video, give it a like, consider subscribing. Until the next one, see ya.